I was 32 years old. I was standing at the kitchen sink at 11 o'clock at night, washing the same pot I had washed every night for 13 years. My hands were in the water. The baby was finally sleeping. The other 6 were finally sleeping. The house had gone quiet in that way it only goes quiet when you are the last one awake, when everyone else has put down whatever they were carrying and handed it to you instead. I heard my husband's footsteps on the stairs. I knew from the sound what he wanted. I had known since supper. There is a way a man sits at a table when he has already decided something. And after 13 years, I had learned to read it the way you read weather, the way a farmer reads a sky before a storm, not to stop the storm, just to know it is coming. I kept my hands in the water. I did not turn around. And I said, no. Not quietly. Not with an apology wrapped around it. Not with the careful softening I had spent 13 years learning to apply to anything that might cause friction. Just, no. My name is Sarah. I was born Old Order Amish in Sugar Creek, Ohio. I married at 18 years old. I had my first child at 19. By the night I said that word at the kitchen sink, I had 7 children under 13 years old. I had been pregnant or nursing for 11 of the last 13 years. I had a body that had done everything it knew how to do, and then kept going past that. And in 13 years of marriage, not one person in my community had ever suggested that what happened to my body was something I had the right to decide. This is beyond the bonnet, where we say the things that were never permitted to be said out loud. If you want to hear more stories from behind the prayer caps, subscribe right now, tap the like button, and leave me a comment below. Tell me, have you ever been in a situation where your body felt like it belonged to someone else? I read every single one. Now, let me tell you what happened after I said no. To understand that night, you first need to understand the world the night happened inside. In an Old Order Amish marriage, a wife's body is not entirely her own. That is not something anyone ever says directly. It is something you absorb the way you absorb weather through years of watching, listening, understanding what is said and what is never said, and what happens to women who step outside either of those categories. The Ordnung, the unwritten code that governs every part of Amish life, does not contain a chapter on this. It does not need to. The understanding lives in the air, in the way the community responds to a woman who has many children, with approval, with admiration, with the particular warmth reserved for women who are visibly, repeatedly obedient to what God designed them for, and in the particular silence directed at women who are not. Children in my district were not a decision. They were evidence of a family's faithfulness, evidence that a wife was yielding to the shape her life was supposed to take. Birth control was not discussed openly. It was simply understood in the way many things were understood without being spoken, that seeking it was selfishness. That a wife who refused her husband was, in the language that would eventually be used to me directly, refusing the will of God. I had watched my mother have 9 children. I had watched my grandmother have 12. I had grown up watching the women around me age in a particular way, carefully, slowly, with a particular stillness in how they moved through church on Sunday mornings. And I had understood before anyone explained it to me that this was the shape of the rest of my life, not as a threat, as water, so constant I did not even register it as something I could question. What happened after that word is the reason I am standing here talking to you today. My 7th child, a boy we named Eli, was born in January of that year. The birth lasted 19 hours. My midwife, a woman from a neighboring district who had attended more births than she could count, looked at me on the second morning after and said something very quietly, almost to herself. She said, "This body has been working for a long time." She did not say anything else. She moved to the other side of the bed and continued her work. But she had said it, and something in me received it in a way I could not have explained. Eli was 9 months old the night I said no. 9 months old and still nursing. Still waking twice each night. I was running on 4 hours of sleep on a good night. I had a daughter with an ear infection I was watching closely. I had bread dough rising on the counter that I had forgotten about since noon. I had a pile of mending in the corner that had not been touched in 3 weeks. I had a 6-year-old who had been asking me to fix her doll for 4 days straight, and every day I had said, "Tomorrow." I was not making a speech when I turned from that sink. I was not prepared with arguments. I was not ready to defend anything. I was just a woman with her hands in cold water who was too exhausted to perform 1 more ounce of a person she was not, and who could not carry a single thing more than what she was already carrying. I turned around. I looked at my husband, and I said, "No, I cannot have another baby. My body has done everything it knows how to do. I need it to stop now." He looked at me for a long time without speaking, and then he said, "That is not your decision to make. I want to be careful about what I tell you next, and how I tell it. What happened in the weeks after that night is not something I will lay out in detail to disturb you. That is not what this channel is about. What I will tell you is the structure of it, because the structure is what matters. A wife who refuses her husband in an Old Order Amish marriage does not only refuse her husband, she refuses the entire architecture the marriage exists inside. She refuses the bishop who blessed the union. She refuses the ordnung. She refuses the community's understanding that her body belongs to something larger than herself, something she agreed to when she was baptized, when she stood before that bishop, when she said her vows. Refusal has consequences. They are rarely loud consequences. They are usually the quietest kind. And silence, I have learned, can carry more weight than any raised voice. My husband spoke to the bishop within 3 days. I knew he would. That is the pathway. That is how these things move inside a community like mine, not through confrontation, but through structure. Through the system that exists precisely to manage these moments and return them to order. I sat with our bishop and his wife on a Wednesday afternoon in February. The room was warm. There was coffee on the table. It was very quiet and very ordinary, and completely unmovable. I was told that what I was feeling was Hokmut pride, a spirit that had not fully surrendered what it needed to surrender. I was told that many women had felt exactly this, the exhaustion, the fear, the sense of being past some limit, and that those women had trusted God and found that God provided. I was told that a willing heart always finds a way. I sat in that chair and I nodded. I knew how to nod. I had been nodding since I was old enough to understand that nodding was what the room required. But something had broken open in me the night I said no, and it did not close again. No matter how well I performed the nodding. There was a woman in my district named Anna. She was 44 years old. She had 11 children. She had been married since she was 17. She moved through every Sunday service, every community gathering, every quilting frolic with a stillness I had always read as deep faith. I had admired it my whole life. I understand now what it actually was. It was the stillness of someone who has stopped swimming against a current they have calculated they cannot beat. It was not peace. It was the accumulation of years of yielding, until yielding had become the only motion left. Anna found me at a neighbor's quilting frolic 3 weeks after my conversation with the bishop. She sat down beside me without a word and began threading her needle. We worked in silence for a long time. Outside, I could hear horses shifting in the barn, the low sound of women talking in the next room. And then Anna said, without looking up from the frame, "I lost the last one." She did not explain. She did not need to. I understood that her body had eventually made a decision her community had never permitted her to make. That somewhere in those 11 pregnancies, something had broken in a way that had answered the question for her, the question her husband, and her bishop had been answering on her behalf for 26 years. She had carried that knowledge entirely alone, with no one ever asking what it had cost her. She finished her thread, she broke it off, and she said, still without looking at me, "You are not the first to feel this, Sarah, and you will not be the last." Then she moved to the other side of the quilt. We did not speak of it again, but I thought about her for months after. 44 years old, 11 children, that particular stillness that was not peace. I thought about what it costs a person to perform serenity for a lifetime. I thought about what we owe each other when the only thing we can offer is 2 sentences over a quilting frame, in a language that sounds like nothing important. I did not leave my community that year. I left 2 years later. And the leaving was slow and expensive and nothing like the single moment of clarity people imagine it must be. There is no morning you wake up and simply know. There are months of knowing, followed by months of not knowing, followed by the weight of what you are about to lose sitting on your chest at 3 in the morning while the house is dark and the children are breathing and the horses are still in the barn. What I lost when I left was real. My community had shown up for every hard winter I had known. The women who sat across from me at every quilting frame had known me since I was a girl. When I left, their doors closed. Letters came back unopened. A community that had been the entire texture of my life became almost overnight an absence shaped exactly like everything I had ever belonged to. That cost does not disappear because the leaving was right. I carry it still. But I also carry this. My youngest daughter is 3 years old now. She has a laugh that arrives without warning and fills whatever room she is in. She has never been told that her needs are evidence of weak faith. She has never been handed a word and taught that the word means nothing when she uses it. I am learning alongside her how to raise a person who knows her own authority over herself. We are figuring it out at the same time, my daughter and I. That is both a grief and something I do not yet have a name for, that sits just above the grief. My therapist, a woman I began seeing the year after I left, said something in one of our early sessions that I have turned over in my mind nearly every day since. She said, "A yes that exists inside a real freedom to say no that is consent. But if the no carries consequences designed to make it functionally impossible, then the yes was never truly a yes. It was the management of an impossible situation dressed as agreement. I had been managing impossible situations my entire married life. I had nodded. I had yielded. I had been faithful in every way my community had trained me to understand faithfulness. And the night I stopped, the night I said the actual word for what I needed, I discovered exactly how much the entire structure had depended on my silence. If you grew up somewhere that taught you your needs were evidence of weakness, I see you. If you were told that wanting anything different made you proud or faithless or too much, I see you. If you have ever stood somewhere, a kitchen, a bedroom, a warm room with someone sitting across from you in authority, and said no, and felt the full weight of a world come down on that one word, you were not wrong. Needing is not sin. Needing is the most ordinary and necessary human thing there is. And any structure that cannot hold your needing is not built for you. It is built to require you to disappear inside it. I am still learning how to need things without apology. My daughter is learning it alongside me. And someday I will find the words to tell her about the night her mother stood at a kitchen sink at 11 o'clock, with cold water on her hands and 7 sleeping children upstairs, and said a word that cost everything. And meant it completely. Subscribe to Beyond the Bonnet. Leave me a comment below. Tell me, have you ever said no and felt a whole world close around that word? Tell me where you are watching from. I want to know.